Harbhajan Singh Khalsa. Harbhajan Singh Khalsa, born Harbhajan Singh Puri, August 26, 1929, October 6, 2004, also known as Yogi Bhajan and Siri Singh Sahib to his followers, was an Indian-born American entrepreneur, yoga guru, and spiritual teacher. He introduced his version of Kundalini Yoga to the United States. He was the spiritual director of the 3HO Healthy, Happy, Holy Organization Foundation, with over 300 centers in 35 countries. Harbhajan Singh has been accused posthumously of sexual abuse by hundreds of his female followers. An investigation called the Olive Branch Report found the allegations most likely true. 3 members of the Siri Singh Sahib Corporation Board, objecting to the hiring of an olive branch, an entity not licensed to conduct investigations, resigned their positions. One of them commissioned the Thompson Report, which found serious failings in both the methods and the presentation of the Olive Branch Report. Biography. Early life. Harbhajan Singh Khalsa was born on August 26, 1929, into a Sikh family in Khatar-Karn, Gujranwala district, in the province of Punjab, now in Pakistan. His father, Dr. Kartar Singh Puri, served the British Raj as a medical doctor. His mother, a Hindu, was named Harkrishan Kaur. His father was raised in the Sikh tradition, and young Harbhajan was educated in a Catholic school run by nuns. Singh learned the fundamentals of Sikhism from his paternal grandfather, Sant by Fate Singh. Theirs was a well-to-do landlord family, owning most of their village in the foothills of the Himalayas. Khalsa's schooling was interrupted in 1947 by the violent partition of India, when he and his family fled to New Delhi as refugees. There, Harbhajan Singh attended Camp College, a hastily put-together arrangement for thousands of refugee students, and was an active member of the Sikh Students' Federation in Delhi. 4 years later, he graduated with a master's degree in economics. In 1953, Harbhajan Singh entered the service of the Government of India. He served in the Revenue Department, where his duties took him all over India. Eventually, Harbhajan Singh was promoted to a customs inspector at Delhi Airport. He married Inderjit Kaur Uppal in Delhi in 1954. Together, they had 3 children, Ranbir Singh Bai, Kulbir Singh and Kamaljit Kaur. By Khalsa's account, his most influential teacher during his formative years was his paternal grandfather. He subsequently studied Kundalini Yoga at a boarding school of Santazara Singh. In his adult life, Harbhajan Singh's government duties often facilitated his traveling to remote ashrams and distant hermitages. These included Sant Ranjit Singh, Aquarian Narendra Dev, and the facilities of Sivananda Ashram. Harbhajan Singh learned yoga therapy from Dayendra Brahmachari at the Vishwayatan Ashram in New Delhi. In his final years in India, he also learned from Baba Versa Singh at Gobind Sadhan Institute. As a devout and much decorated Sikh, all of Khalsa's teaching was deeply influenced by Guru Nanak and his spiritual tradition. Coming west. In 1968, Harbhajan Singh emigrated to Toronto, Canada, equipped with an endorsement from that country's High Commissioner to India, James George, who was also a student of his, and the promise of a position as director of a new Yogic Studies department at the University of Toronto. While that position did not materialize because of the death of his sponsor in an auto mishap, Harbhajan Singh made a considerable impact in the predominantly Anglo-Saxon metropolis. In 3 months, he established classes at several IMCAs, co-founded a yoga center, was interviewed for national press and television, and helped set in motion the creation of Eastern Canada's first Sikh temple in time for Guru Nanak's 500th birthday the following year. Soon after arriving in Los Angeles, California in December 1968, Harbhajan Singh met Judith Tyberg, who operated the East-West Cultural Center in Osu, who would become his first student, renamed Shakti Parwa Kaur. Tyberg invited Khalsa to speak at her center on January 6, his first lecture in the West. After that, he became a regular presenter with a growing following from within the hippie movement. Healthy, Happy, Holy Organization. In 1969, Harbhajan Singh established the 3HO Healthy, Happy, Holy Organization Foundation in Los Angeles, California to further his missionary work. His brand of Sikhism appealed to the hippies who formed the bulk of his early converts. The Sikh practice of not cutting one's hair or beard was already accepted by the hippie culture, as was Sikh vegetarianism. They liked to experience elevated states of awareness, and they also deeply wanted to feel they were contributing to a world of peace and social justice. He offered them all these things with vigorous yoga, an embracing holistic vision, and an optimistic spirit of sublime destiny. Interest in yoga increased worldwide at this time. To serve the changing times, Harbhajan Singh created the International Kundalini Yoga Teachers Association, dedicated to setting standards for teachers and the propagation of the teachings. In 1994, the 3HO Foundation joined the United Nations as a non-governmental organization in consultative status with the Economic and Social Council, representing women's issues, promoting human rights, and providing education about alternative systems of medicine. Aquarian Age Timeline. Harbhajan Singh incorporated the storyline of the dawning New Age into his teachings, a case of melding Western astrology with Sikh tradition. He proclaimed that Guru Nanak was the guru for the Aquarian Age. It was, he declared, to be an age where people first experienced God, then believed, rather than the old way of believing and then being liberated by one's faith. His timeline for the arrival of the Aquarian Age varied over the years, but in 1992, he fixed it at 2012 and gave his students a set of morning meditations to practice until that date to prepare themselves. Interfaith work. In the summer of 1970, Harbhajan Singh participated in an informal Holy Man Jam at the University of Colorado at Boulder with Swami Satchidananda, another Eastern yogi who has been accused of sexual abuse of his students, Stephen Gaskin of the farm in Tennessee, Zen Buddhist Bill Kwan Roshi, and other local spiritual leaders. A few weeks later, he organized a gathering of spiritual teachers to engage and inspire the 200,000 attendees of the Atlanta International Pop Festival on the stage between the performances of the bands. All through the 1970s and 80s, in his role the Siri Singh Sahib of Sikh Dharma, Harbhajan Singh actively engaged in and chaired numerous interreligious councils and forums, including the Interreligious Council of Southern California, the World Conference for the Unity of Man, and the World Parliament of Religions. In 1999, he gave a presentation at the Parliament of the World's Religions in Cape Town, South Africa. Political influence in U.S. As early as 1970, Khalsa was known to call on members of Congress in their Washington offices. He also befriended successive governors of the state of New Mexico. Harbhajan Singh was known as a Democrat. Since 1980, he was both friend and advisor to Bill Richardson. Healing arts. When U.S. President Nixon called drugs America's #1 domestic problem, Harbhajan Singh Khalsa launched a pilot program with 2 longtime heroin addicts in Washington, D.C. in 1972. The next year, a full-blown drug treatment center known as 3HO Super Health was launched in Tucson, Arizona. The program used Kundalini Yoga, diet and massage therapy to treat the addicts and taught hundreds of techniques of yogic exercise and meditation. Many have been catalogued by their traditionally known effects in calming and healing the mind and body. Some of those techniques have been scientifically studied and applied in clinical practice with favorable results. Obituaries and memorials. Reception. Media coverage. Harbhajan Singh received significant coverage in the North American media, particularly in the early 1970s. His message of no drugs, family values and healthy living was widely popular, and many of the media stories were positive, serving not only to educate the public, but also to publicize the work of the 3HO Foundation. Some focused on the lifestyle, others on the inspiration behind the organization. Others focused on Singh's holistic approach to drug addiction. Some writers reported on Singh's officiating at mass marriages where many couples were betrothed at once, and everyone wore white. Others reported on the issue of Sikhs up against the U.S. Army dress code. While Newsweek, USA Today, and Maclean's magazine in Canada published favorable articles about Harbhajan Singh in 1977, James Wilde of Time wrote a critical article that year titled Yogi Bhajan's Synthetic Sikhism. Wilde alleged that Gurucharan Singh Tohra, former president of the Shiromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee (SGPC), had stated that Harbhajan Singh is not the leader of Sikhism in the Western world as he claimed, and that Tohra had denied the SGPC had ever given Singh the title of Siri Singh Sahib. The Time article was followed by emphatic rebuttals from Tohra. There was also a demonstration held outside Time's London office, and a detailed demand for a retraction, published under the title Time Will Tell in the 3HO publication Beads of Truth, issue 36. Fall 1977. Harbhajan Singh is mentioned in reference works including the New Age Encyclopedia. Western scholarly appraisal of his work may be found in Hugh MacLeod's Who is a Sikh? And Sikhism, and Vern A. Dusenbury's article Punjabi Sikhs and Gora Sikhs, Conflicting Assertions of Sikh Identity in North America. The BBC interviewed Singh at the 300th anniversary celebration of the Baisakhi holiday at Anandpur Sahib, India in 1999. Harbhajan Singh is featured in books discussing the successes of Sikhs who migrated from India to the West, including Surjit Kaur's Among the Sikhs, Reaching for the Stars, and Gurmukh Singh's The Global Indian, The Sikhs. Sikh scholars' views on Singh's mission. Kapur Singh, a Sikh scholar recognized by the Akal Takht as the national professor of Sikhism, praised Singh highly for his work in spreading Sikhism in the West. In his words, "Glory be to the Guru, who performs his work in the Western Hemisphere through this instrument. Blessed be those who have learned from him the teachings of the Guru, to accept and follow those teachings in unswerving faith and in humble recognition of the good that Harbhajan Singh has done in furtherance of the Guru's mission." The historian Fauja Singh praised Singh's marriage of yoga. The historian of Sikhism Trilochan Singh offered a contrasting perspective in his critical work entitled Sikhism and Tantric Yoga. "I am extremely worried about the manner in which Yogi Bhajan teaches Sikhism to American young men and women whose sincerity, nobility of purpose, and rare passion for Oriental wisdom and genuine mystical experiences. I set out to answer the question, where did Kundalini Yoga as taught by Yogi Bhajan Kayatbid come from, and not much else. I tried to support my findings with as much evidence as possible, and for that evidence to be as clear, specific, verifiable, and close to the source, such as interviews with first-hand witnesses, Pamela being one of them, quotes from Yogi Bhajan, contemporary newspaper accounts, and exercises taken from manuals. I concluded that in the early years of 3HO, Yogi Bhajan was using the physical yoga of Swami Dayendra Brahmachari and the persona and mantra of Baba Versa Singh, and that the figure of Sant Hazura Singh only became prominent after the first trip to India in 1970-1971, when Yogi Bhajan had a falling out with Versa Singh. Alleged sexual abuse of women. In 2019, Yogi Bhajan's former secretary Pamela Sahara Dyson published the book Prinkau, White Bird in a Golden Cage, My Life with Yogi Bhajan, reporting that she and other women had sexual relationships with Harbhajan Singh. In March 2020, anti-cult activist B. Schofield published an article in her magazine The Guru reporting sexual abuse and rape of female followers and assistants, including Dyson, by Harbhajan Singh, based on over a dozen original interviews. That same month, the Siri Singh Sahib Corporation commissioned an olive branch AOB to look into the allegations. The AOB report, published in August, found that it was more likely than not that Yogi Bhajan raped 3 women, injured 8 women during sex, engaged in non-consensual touching of 9 people. showed pornography to minors, used sexually offensive language, directed women to shave their pubic hair, directed women to have sex with other women. The report acknowledged the convictions of Yogi Bhajan's supporters as accurate representations of their beliefs, rather than deliberate falsehoods. Soon after, other media published stories based on the report that considered the allegations to be true. Upset by the commissioning of the report by an olive branch, 3 members of the Siri Sahib Corporation Board resigned in June. One of them, Guru Amrit Singh Khalsa, commissioned Barbara W. Thompson, a private investigator and former attorney, to write an assessment of the AOB report. The result, the Thompson report, released on December 31, 2020, did not address the substance of the AOB investigation's findings, but asserted that the AOB authors were insufficiently qualified and that the methodology of their report was deficient. It stated that the Siri Sahib Corporation deviated from normal practice by instructing AOB both to conduct a survey and to evaluate and determine the final implications of their own report, and it criticized the report's definition of investigation. Publications: Yogi Bhajan, The Teachings of Yogi Bhajan, Santa Cruz, New Mexico, Kundalini Research Institute, 1977, and Harbhajan Khalsa, Poems to Live By, Columbus, Ohio, Furman Khalsa Publishing Company, 1987. Master's Touch, Santa Cruz, New Mexico, Kundalini Research Institute, 1997. With Harbhajan Singh Khalsa, The Mind, Its Projections and Multiple Facets, Espanola, New Mexico, Kundalini Research Institute, 1997. The Aquarian Teacher KRI International Kundalini Yoga Certification Text and Manual, Santa Cruz, New Mexico, Kundalini Research Institute, 2003. The Game of Love, A Book of Consciousness, The Poems and Art of Yogi Bhajan, Espanola, New Mexico, Sikh Dharma International, 2007. Man to Man, A Journal of Discovery for the Conscious Man, Santa Cruz, New Mexico, Kundalini Research Institute, 2008. I Am a Woman Book and Yoga Manual, Santa Cruz, New Mexico, Kundalini Research Institute, 2009.